Good day and welcome to the walkthrough video of the new 2021 2.0 update for, Symphobia 1, ProjectSAM's classic orchestral library for Kontakt. I am Maarten of ProjectSAM and I'm going to take you through the biggest new features this free update has to offer. So this is a big one. Symphobia was the library that put us on the map. It certainly changed the game for us as a developer, but I think it's also fair to say that it set a new standard for orchestral ensemble recordings. It was one of the first libraries that gave you this epic orchestral sound right out of the box. Maybe you can remember your first time playing Symphobia. The library has been around since 2008, and it has earned a cherished place in many composers' templates. After all these years, Symphobia still sounds great. In fact, we still record our orchestral projects in the very same concert hall today. We were there last month for, not going to say. The ensembles in Symphobia still hold up. They work great to enrich a MIDI production or to sketch out a scene. And the library also has a lot of unique presets and articulations that you can't really find elsewhere, and they became user favorites over the years. And the orchestral effects are still heavily used as well. It's a lot of fun for us to spot them. That might be a Netflix series one day and some YouTube video another. And Symphobia has gotten a number of solid updates through its lifetime, 5 to be exact. But even with these updates, Symphobia's shell has gotten a bit rusty. It's time for a new shell. We recently released a big 2.0 update for TrueStrike 1, introducing a completely new engine and design, a new foundation. And on this foundation, we now rebuilt Symphobia 1. The library has been restructured and tweaked. We redid most of the envelopes, filters, and modulators. We even revisited some of the original audio. And as a big thank you to all you Symphobia 1 users out there, this update is 100% free for all existing users, even if you bought it all the way back in 2008. And the update allows you to go from this to this. Now, this video takes an in-depth look at all the new features, so it's a little longer. For a much shorter overview video of what's new, check the link in the description. Also, if you are running into any problems updating Symphobia, skip to the updating chapter near the end of this video for instructions. Now, let's dive in. If you have already checked out the TrueStrike 1 update, you will notice that the Symphobia 1 update has a number of things in common. First of all, Symphobia is now an all-in-one instrument as well. All sounds from the original library can now be accessed right from here using the new library browser. First time you load Symphobia, you can simply click anywhere on this welcome screen. And at any other moment, you can open the library browser here in the top left corner. You can browse for instruments, for multis, and for individual articulations. You can also filter. For example, I can see just the instruments that feature strings. And here's the dystopia presets in a separate list. And under multis, you can see just the ones within the suspend genre, for example. And perhaps most useful, under articulations, you can filter as well. These are the instruments featuring sustains, or staccato, or clusters. And we also added a filter to group all the articulations that offer adaptive sync. More on that later. And to load, simply click any of the items from the list. It will instantly load the required samples into RAM very quickly. If I browse for an individual articulation, it will load just that articulation into RAM. The other articulations remain unloaded, which you can tell by their dimmed appearance. Let's take a look at the multis again. Multis are combinations of instruments stacked and mixed together to create an inspirational tool. They're great to sketch out ideas with. In older versions of Symphobia, multis used multiple contact tracks. But now, in 2.0, everything is done in a single Symphobia instrument, using these mixer slots down here. Each of these slots can hold an instrument with its own unique settings: the mic mix, envelope, reverb, transpose, and so on. By default, a multi shows you these 3 global effects, and they apply to the entire instrument, so all 10 slots down here, together. If I wish to see the controls for one of these individual instruments, I first have to unlock the multi. I can now select the slots. If I lock again, I get back to the global effects screen. Now, for this 2.0 update, we revisited and recreated a selection of the classic multis from previous versions of Symphobia. Multis like Are You Not Entertained? Cat and Mouse. Jeep Fight. Or Tension Builder. You'll hopefully recognize some of these. But we also added 13 new ones. This is a new one using Dystopia instruments only, the Blight. And this one, Morning Dew. And finally, this one, The Desert Takes the Week. My desert. Sorry about that. So, these multis are created by us. But the new Symphobia interface makes it super easy to create your own by loading multiple instruments in the mixer slots and using any of the controls and effects at your disposal. You can then save your custom multi as a snapshot. And this allows you to find it and locate it directly in, for example, Complete. The browser also offers a small preview button next to each item. For the multis, these play back a little mini demo. Nice. And for the instruments and articulations, you'll hear a single representative note. And that's quite useful. And finally, the browser can also be pinned. This is useful if you're looking for the right instrument or sound, or with this toggle here set to first free slot, if you want to quickly load multiple instruments in multiple slots, like this. Alright, let's look at the new interface and at what it can do. This is the performance view, and it's where you'll spend most time. There are 4 tabbed views in total. The other 3 are the mapping view, effects, and settings. And each of these views shows you the controls for the instrument that is selected down here in the mixer slots. As you can see, if I switch slots, everything in the performance view changes accordingly. For now, let's load a single instrument to keep things simple. Here in the middle, we have the new articulation grid. It shows you the articulations available for this instrument, with their name and a little visual representation in each of these tiles. I can switch articulations by clicking a tile, and I can stack or layer multiple articulations by shift-clicking. And I can unload articulations by Command or Control clicking to save RAM. Command on Mac, Control on Windows. The white ones are still loaded into RAM and the dimmed ones are unloaded. And I can simply click them to reload them again. By default, the first instrument I add to the mixer has key switching assigned as the switching control here. In each tile, you can see the key switch assigned for that articulation. And I can change the assigned key switch by selecting the articulation and using the control over here. It's also possible to switch articulations using a continuous controller. Here, CC1 is assigned by default, but you can change this to almost any CC you want. Now, you may have noticed that for some of the articulations that I selected, a list appeared on the right here. This is the variations list, and it appears if, surprise, multiple variations are available for the selected articulation. For example, the string sustains articulation has these 4 variations available: vibrato, fast attack, soft, and concertino. And the string effects articulation has these 5 variations available. The variations list offers the exact same functionality as the articulation grid. I can switch by clicking, I can stack by shift clicking, and I can unload by command or control clicking. I can also switch variations using key switching or continuous controller. And what's good to know is that the default positions of these key switches, both for the articulations and the variations, can be changed in the global settings over here. Let's look at the other controls on the right here. For each individual variation or articulation if there are no variations, you can set up the dynamic controller. By default, all long samples are assigned to the modulation wheel and all shorter samples to velocity, but you can set this up any way you like. You can control the strings dynamically using the expression pedal, for example, and reserve the modulation wheel for something else. And underneath, you have 4 quick controls for attack, release, reverb, and volume. And this volume is unique for each variation level. So if I stack together multiple articulations or variations, I can change the balance of these elements using this volume control. As opposed to the volume control down here in the mixer, which works on an instrument level. I mentioned it earlier. Symphobia 1 now supports adaptive sync. We introduced adaptive sync in Symphobia 4 Pandora, and later expanded on it with adaptive runs. TrueStrike 1 offers it since its 2.0 update, and now Symphobia 1 does as well. Adaptive sync allows you to have all crescendos, rolls, and other samples that have a musical build-up to automatically sync to your host and tempo. To accomplish this for Symphobia 1, we went back to the original audio pool and cleaned it up so that the crescendos, runs, and rises are compatible with adaptive sync. Now, of course, Symphobia 1 was not originally recorded with adaptive sync in mind, so you'll get a more capable adaptive sync experience with Pandora or adaptive runs. But it does work. The samples do sync. All sounds that offer adaptive sync show this little logo, and if I select one, I get an adaptive sync control over here. Adaptive sync has 3 modes. I can set a fixed number of beats based on my host tempo. And I can also select downbeat mode, which automatically adjusts the sample to musically sync to the first beat of the next bar. And all of this is tempo dependent. If I change my tempo, everything is still in sync. Before I move on to the other views up here, let's not forget to check out the left section of the performance view. This section is all about the microphone positions. Most instruments in Symphobia 1 have been recorded at 2 unique distances from the players, close and stage. And the slider here allows you to smoothly morph between these mic positions. You can also snap to a mic position by clicking the labels. This unloads the other mic position from RAM. If you want more control over the mics, you can switch to the mic fader view using this button. You can now set the level of each individual mic, load or unload it, and select a different contact output per mic. Let's move on to the next tabbed view up here. We've been in the performance view so far. Let's check out the mapping view. The mapping view gives you almost full control over the range and position of each individual articulation and variation in Symphobia. Say I load the string section in slot 1 and the brass section in slot 2. And I want the strings to respond in the lower range only and the brass in the higher range. I can do this very easily. I'll select the slot with the strings, go to the mapping view and trim the upper range like this. I'll now select the slot holding the brass and do the opposite. Trim the lower range and drag it to the right like this. And you can see the effect on the keyboard. I'll make this a little clearer by picking a different color for the brass. There. I can also shift or transpose an articulation or variation by dragging the keys left or right, or by changing the value over here. If I shift the brass left by an octave, it will now overlap again with the strings, but with an octave offset. There's also a cool note stacker. It will add notes to any notes that I play. I can use the note stacker as a simple octaver, like this. But I can also use it to create more interesting results, like adding a diminished chords to my note. Some of the multis use the note stacker in this way. Nice. And finally, the mapping view offers some velocity controls. I can offset the incoming velocity so that it triggers a different layer or sample. And I can set a velocity gate so that it only triggers below or above a certain value. Now the brass will only play at louder velocities. If I want to reset everything back to default, I can click the reset button here, and this resets the mapping for the currently selected slot. Alright, that is the mapping view. Let's look at the effects view. For the acoustic instruments in the library, the equalizer, cutoff filter and limiter are especially useful here. But for more of a sound design approach, or when using a dystopia sound from the library, there's a number of other useful effects at your disposal as well. And please note that the effects and controls in the red section on the left are per slot. The effects and controls in the dark section on the right are global. These are the same effects that you saw earlier after loading a multi. And this is the global convolution reverb that each slot can send to. You can pick a different impulse here and also change the size of the impulse sample. The fourth and last tabbed view is settings. This view allows you to tweak a number of things for each individual slot, so each individual instrument. You can set a different pitch bend range, change the dynamics of the release trails, enable or disable round robin, and you can also assign a CC number to control the mic mix and panning of the slot in question. And this again is very useful when automating. Next up, NKS, the native control standard. Symphobia 1 did already have NKS support, but for this major 2.0 update, we've remapped all controls and created new presets, new snapshots. You can browse all individual Symphobia instruments as well as all individual articulations right from the native browser in Complete or Machine. And with Symphobia now being an all-in-one instrument, this is useful as it allows you to search for a term like pizzicato and get results for the updated Symphobia as well. If you have a complete control, and maybe you should, you can access the most important controls right from there. You can switch mixer slots, articulations, variations. You can adjust mic distance, reverb send level, and more. And complete control, of course, also conveniently shows you the range of each instrument using the light guide feature. There's a few last things I'd like to show you before rounding off. This new 2.0 version of Symphobia has a ton of new options. And many of these options can be tweaked in the global settings, which you can access by clicking the wheel here in the bottom left corner. These settings are global because they affect the entire Symphobia instrument. As I already mentioned earlier, you can change the default key switch positions. For example, if I wish to have the articulation key switches start an octave higher, I can do so here. And next time I load an instrument from the new library browser, the key switches will now start at C0. You can choose to not preload adaptive sync samples. This means they'll appear dimmed in the articulation grid until you click them. And since adaptive sync samples are fully loaded into RAM and not buffered, selecting this option can save quite some RAM. You can specify a default dynamic controller. For example, I can have it be velocity in all cases, or mod wheel in all cases. You can enable mixer slot key switching. What this does is assign a key switch not per articulation, but per mixer slot, per instrument. I can now switch slots like this, and the selected slot automatically is soloed, and the key switches can be assigned over here. Here in global settings, we have a list of so-called disablers. They allow you to quickly disable a specific feature across the entire library. You can disable all articulation key switches in one go, or disable all release trails in one go, without having to change this for each slot individually, and perhaps having to change it back later. You can also turn on or off the tooltips that you may have seen come by in this video. It's this line over here that gives you a short summary of each control when you click it or touch it. Next to the global settings icon, there is the lock icon. This locks up parts of the interface and controls to prevent you from accidentally making an unwanted change. Multis always load with the lock enabled, as you saw earlier. But you can lock your own work at any time. Say I have a couple of articulations loaded and unloaded from RAM, and I want to avoid accidentally clicking them, which would reload them back into RAM, I can enable the lock. And clicking the unloaded sounds now won't do anything. And finally, if you want to start all over, reset all slots and parameters, you can use the clear button in the bottom right corner. There. And this also takes you right back to the library browser. With the new 2.0 update, Symphobia 1 is now an all-in-one instrument. There is now a single NKI file from which you can access all sounds in the library, this one. However, it's good to know that if you're an existing Symphobia 1 user and you are updating to the new 2.0 version, the old instrument subfolders as well as the multis folder will remain. The update won't delete anything. Updating is done from NI's native Access application. After updating, you will still see the old subfolders and instruments in Contact. The new all-in-one NKI file is underneath, over here. To use the new version of Symphobia, make sure you load this instrument. The old instruments in any existing projects that use Symphobia will still load just fine, but they will require the same higher Contact version that the new instrument also needs. And this is Contact or Contact Player 653 at the time of creating this video. If you no longer use the old instruments and multis, feel free to delete them. This will also get rid of the old multis tab over here in Contact's library browser, which the new 2.0 version no longer uses. If you are unsure how to delete these folders, there's documentation explaining it all available right here. One other thing about updating. if you bought Symphobia 1 in the first few years, before 2011 or so, you will have the original uncompressed audio pool installed. Later versions of Symphobia 1 came with a new compressed audio pool in NI's lossless NCW format. The new all-in-one update expects this new compressed pool, and if you have the old one installed, you will get a missing content dialog like this one. And there's two ways around this. The first is to simply do a full reinstall from native access. And the upside of doing this is that you also get some audio improvements that were done over the years. The second way is to tag the Allow Alternative File Types checkbox in this dialog. Then click Browse for Folder and locate your existing Symphobia library folder. Contact will then be able to find and link the audio files. If you now save the instrument, you won't have to do this again. And that's it for the Symphobia 1 2.0 update walkthrough video. If you are already a Symphobia user, again, this update is 100% free. Just start the native access application and update Symphobia from there. Your old instruments will remain and existing projects will not automatically update to the new design and features. You have to do this manually. But, as I mentioned earlier, do note that existing projects featuring Symphobia 1 will require the higher contact requirement from the moment you install the update, even if you do not yet load the new all-in-one instrument. And this is contact or contact player 653 at the time of creating this video. And if you watched this video and you do not have Symphobia 1 yet, well, is there a better time to get it? I think not. So, with TrueStrike 1 and Symphobia 1 now updated to the new 2.0 foundation, what's next? Well, our 2.0 roadmap is not necessarily chronological, but the next library planned actually is Symphobia 2. And I hope to see you then. Bye bye. With the new 2.0 update, Symphobia 1 is now an all-in-one instrument. There is now a single NKI file from which you can access all sounds in the library, this one. However, it's good to know that if you're an existing Symphobia 1 user and you are updating to the new 2.0 version, the old instrument subfolders as well as the multis folder will remain. The update won't delete anything. Updating is done from NI's native access application. After updating, you will still see the old subfolders and instruments in Contact. The new all-in-one NKI file is underneath, over here. To use the new version of Symphobia, make sure you load this instrument. The old instruments in any existing projects that use Symphobia will still load just fine, but they will require the same higher Contact version that the new instrument also needs. And this is contact or contact player 653 at the time of creating this video. If you no longer use the old instruments and multis, feel free to delete them. This will also get rid of the old multis tab over here in Contact's library browser, which the new 2.0 version no longer uses. If you are unsure how to delete these folders, there's documentation explaining it all available right here. One other thing about updating. If you bought Symphobia 1 in the first few years, before 2011 or so, you will have the original uncompressed audio pool installed. Later versions of Symphobia 1 came with a new compressed audio pool in NI's lossless NCW format. The new all-in-one update expects this new compressed pool, and if you have the old one installed, you will get a missing content dialog like this one. And there's two ways around this. The first is to simply do a full reinstall from native access. And the upside of doing this is that you also get some audio improvements that were done over the years. The second way is to tag the Allow Alternative File Types checkbox in this dialog. Then click Browse for Folder and locate your existing Symphobia library folder. Kontakt will then be able to find and link the audio files. If you now save the instrument, you won't have to do this again.